Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks very much, or I guess good afternoon. Thanks very much for being here for another Sunday School. We're joined by Masters in Law, Kristen Lewis. Many of you know Kristen already. She's going to be doing a presentation dealing with, or I guess, how you might deal with the collision of false allegations that happen in family court and criminal court concurrently. We toyed with the idea of calling this straddling false allegations or straddling family law and criminal law allegations concurrently. I think Kristen actually came up with a better title for her presentation. But Kristen, thank you very much for being here this morning. Really happy to have you. Glad to see you here, and hope you can share some nuggets of knowledge with the group. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me here, Gavin. And it's good to see, I know some of you, but not everybody. So for those of you I do know, it's really good to see you this morning. I feel like it's a miracle for us just to show up in the same moment in time together. So thank you for surviving up till now. And for those of you I don't know, it's good to meet you in this way. I don't know your stories, but I know if you're here that you've been impacted by the horribly unjust state of family law and criminal law as it pertains to men in particular at this moment in time. So good to see you, and I'm grateful that you're here. There's lots who aren't here. So you don't have internet in jail, or you don't have internet if you don't survive. So I'm grateful for you. I wanted to say it like that. So I salute your strength. And just a little bit about myself. So I have a couple of law degrees, a regular JD, and then a master's of law, which I got later in life after doing some other things. And up until recently, I was the executive director of the Ottawa and Vancouver branches of the Canadian Centre for Men and Families. So some of what I speak to comes from the stories that I've heard from dozens of men who came through the Canadian Centre for Men and Families, which gave me a really clear idea of the patterns that are at play in the current moment as it pertains to family law and false allegations. So all of the information that I receive from those men is strictly confidential. So anything I say is just general broad strokes. Amazingly, there is so much similarity across situations that seem to be so strange. So it seems like a lot of women do the same kinds of things. And in a lot of cases, the legal system supports them in a lot of the same kinds of ways. So I wanted to say it that way, that anything I share is just general, not sharing anyone's personal information. The other thing I wanted to say is that I'm not sharing legal advice. So don't take anything I say and then run with it as if it's legal advice. I'm not a lawyer, not called to the bar deliberately. I have some deep reservations about the way the legal system runs right now. So I've decided to delay getting called to the bar. And it's my pleasure to use whatever legal training I have to serve you in this way at this time. So I'm going to give a bit of a presentation, and then at the end of it, open the floor for questions. And I want to say that I'm as interested in the wisdom and expertise and life experience that you bring to this issue as I am in what I have to share. So we'll have time to open the floor that way, and grateful to Gavin for providing this forum for us to gather together and grow in strength. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation. And here we go. We got it. All right. See if I can move this around. Slideshow, yes. Okay, so yeah, I've chosen to call the presentation Contending with Family Law and Criminal Law Proceedings Concurrently. Or maybe the more apt title is How to Wrestle a Pregnant Tiger Without Getting Destroyed. So first, I'm going to talk about some of the situations when this combination of factors comes up. Many of these situations will be all too familiar to you, but I wanted to speak about them in general ways just to show that this is a more general problem that comes up. It may unfortunately be specific to each of you, but it's a pattern that exists in the culture at large. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about some legal issues and strategy, touching on the issue of parental alienation as it pertains to family law, and in the criminal law context, just a little bit about the rights that you still retain, even if you've been convicted of a crime, because a lot of times in the legal system and in the public in general, people act like those charged with offenses or even those convicted with offenses don't have rights, but that's not true. So just knowing that you have rights can be a source of empowerment. And then I'm going to turn to the question of some personal strategies that, in speaking to many of the men through the Canadian Centre for Men and Families, I have found to be markers of success. And then at the end, I'll open the floor for discussions. So as I was saying, I worked for the Canadian Centre for Men and Families for a year and a half, and in this time heard many stories from men dealing with concurrent family law and criminal law cases, almost always as a result of the fallout of toxic relationships. And I'd like to honor these men's stories and thank them for what they taught me through the strength of their example. And I keep front of mind the existence of, I would say, at least thousands of men in this country. Some of them make it to False Allegations Canada. Some of them make it to the Canadian Centre for Men and Families or other support venues, but many do not. So I remember the ones who don't have the support and honor them in the silence. So this presentation is dedicated to these men and to their children who deal with the compound form of abuse that comes from running up against abusive females in the first place, and then encountering a legal system that too often enables the female abusers to continue their abuse through the court system. And I want to say that I don't hold these women to blame either. There's plenty of room for anger and outrage at what's happened, but I think underneath the surface pattern are almost always deep stories of trauma that didn't get handled properly, and women, unfortunately, who suffered deep trauma in the earlier parts of their lives, and then rather than dealing with it or having support dealing with it, they end up projecting it onto the wrong targets, which is when a false allegation often happens. So I want to honor the women too and say, I'm sorry they're not getting the support that they need. And I'm sorry that they're not getting the support they need when they go to the authorities to handle things truthfully rather than getting enabled in sharing falsities, because that's sad for everybody. So typical first pattern that I've seen through my work is that a relationship reaches a point of no return, after which a rupture occurs. There's been a buildup of conflict over time. The couple lack the ability to communicate, often because one half of the couple has characteristics of a high conflict personality, meaning a person whose habit is to escalate conflict rather than seek to mitigate it. It doesn't mean that there's not responsibility on both parties, however. I've seen a tendency for men to point the finger at the ex and say, she was a narcissist. And often that absolutely is the case, and that's a very valid thing to say, but everybody can benefit from building stronger skills. So I see all of this as a learning opportunity rather than a finger pointing thing. We can learn skills to deal with the narcissists in our lives and learn skills to construct our lives so we don't have to deal with that particular personality type. But in general, this is what I've seen is there's one half of the couple that has some extreme personality traits. Situation reaches a point of no return. The social environment lacks the tools and infrastructure to support couples in conflict. So there are no elders or grandparents around who can offer appropriate support. Often the therapeutic industry supports the idea of a female victim and a male perpetrator. So even women who are not at all victimized in a relationship might get encouraged by their counselor or social worker to think that they are. So this is another example of lack of education in the culture generally, and lack of the appropriate kind of support, lack of the kind of support that can see through the deep patterns in the relationship and offer legitimate help rather than the kind of help that just replicates division. So then things reach a tipping point, and eventually someone decides it's a good idea to involve the police. Rarely a good idea, but it's kind of what people do. And it can even be the man who thinks the police can help. Is dealing with violent behavior in the woman, calls the police only to find himself arrested as a result often of her violence. Police are often not very good at reading female violence as violence, so we'll think it's usually the man's fault. Allegations ensue, often unfounded, or there might be that the man did something not that severe, but then a whole bunch of other allegations come on top of that that are much more severe. The man is arrested, removed from contact with his children, and now ex, and then a long period of separation ensues, in which the parties cannot communicate except through the court, often because of court orders for no contact. This can be necessary for safety reasons in a very small number of cases. But in many, many cases, the period of separation only exacerbates the conflict because stories can generate inside the silence that just aren't true. Projections accumulate, and before you know it, an already bad conflict gets much, much worse through court-ordered separation. And then the criminal allegations resulting from the rupture are used in family court to justify one person, usually the woman, keeping the children in her care. And courts will often make decisions that affect the lives of children irrevocably on the basis of mere allegations. So nothing's gone to criminal court yet. There hasn't even been a family law trial. There's an interim decision, which means a decision that's not yet final in family court, in which the judge takes the fact of allegations as meaning that there actually was the abuse that the woman says there was. So that's one pattern. The second pattern is maybe a bit more pernicious. And this would be that the one partner, typically female, wants to exit the relationship for whatever reason, and she lacks the skills to navigate a smooth exit, which is again no fault on her. Most people don't know how to terminate a relationship. It's a difficult skill to know how to do. But so she therefore orchestrates an exit, often playing the authorities to her advantage. She flees with the children to some relative's house, claims there is family violence even if there wasn't, or she might provoke a fight by exhibiting some particularly offensive behavior, which then causes the man to act out. And unless a man has extreme levels of self-control, he might act out in a way that crosses the line into assaultive behavior. He may not generally be an abusive person, but he's just provoked in a moment in time. And then his reaction is used against him. The police get involved. When he tries to get access to the children, she brings further allegations against him. So maybe there was one incident relating to her provocation, not good. Everyone should have enough self-control so that violence doesn't happen. But anyway, nobody's perfect. But then he tries to get access to the children. And then sometimes even months later, she'll bring allegations against him. Often referring to fabricated incidents that she claimed occurred several years ago within the relationship. And then uses his one unskillful reaction in the heat of their separation as evidence of a whole pattern of abuse, which probably didn't ever exist. Criminal charges result. Man is placed either in custody or on unrestricted bail conditions awaiting trial, and it's usually a long wait. Meanwhile, she has temporary custody of the children, and then that temporary custody of the children is used to enforce what the courts call a status quo, which then gives her an advantage in family court. So she's effectively provoked the man, hoped that was enough to get the kids. When it wasn't and he tries to fight back, she brings more allegations. Family court is terrified of family violence, tends to believe her, gives her temporary care of the children. Temporary turns into permanent because the courts have a prejudice in favor of status quo. So none of those are probably unfamiliar to any of you, unfortunately. So I'm sorry you've had to deal with that situation. And I want to say also, this is not knocking the woman. There's actually a failure in authority, a failure in the police, a failure in the court system to support a woman through relationship breakdown in a good way, including like checking for trauma histories that might be causing her to project past trauma onto the future, even if it isn't true. All right, so then from this set of circumstances, a bunch of legal issues will arise. I wanted to stop just to give a brief definition of law. The whole legal system, as some of you will be all too familiar, is weird. It uses extremely complicated language, unnecessarily complex language, I would say, and just seems like this strange sort of gone down the labyrinth, weird world where nothing is what it seems. So I wanted to just ask, what is law anyway? So first of all, law is a reflection of cultural norms, and I would also say habits. So law is a way that society expresses its views on right and wrong. So it's mostly that. So when you walk into a courtroom, you walk into a mediation, you walk into an interview with a police officer, there's already this whole field of norms that are influencing the whole situation. And that's much more important often than the actual procedures or formal rules that govern law. But law is also a set of regulated procedures determined by formal rules. So in Ontario, the Ontario family rules, the rules of civil procedure, the rules of criminal procedure. So it's a way of doing things. And often the procedures will be much more what law is than actually the rules. So you're on bail for a long period of time. It takes forever to get your court case. You have to fill out this form or that form. All those procedures will end up regulating your behavior, and that ends up being your experience of law. And then finally, law is a body of formal rules determined by statute. Those are the laws that governments pass, like the Divorce Act or the Criminal Code. And then also case law or precedent, decisions that judges make. And these decisions then influence how the actual laws, like the Divorce Act or the Criminal Code, are interpreted, which is important to know, that intersection between statutes and case law, especially if you're representing yourself. You'll have to learn how to look to the case law to clarify what the law means in the statutes, because the statutes are never completely determined. And that can be helpful because there can be different case law that says different things, and you can use that to your advantage. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the norms that men will encounter when entering the legal arena. And I don't want to say that these are always the case. It's just good to know, as many of you do because you're here, that when you enter the legal arena, whether it's a police officer, a children's services worker, or anyone, there's this norm that says men are usually the danger and women are usually the victims of that danger. There's reasons for that norm coming to pass. Men sometimes are the danger, and it's something that authorities have learned to guard against, but they haven't guarded against the other possibility, which is that women can also be the danger. There's this norm that says women are more trustworthy caretakers of children. Again, sometimes men are bad, sometimes women are bad, but there is a bias in favor of presuming that females are pretty good with children, which experience shows is not a presumption that applies in all cases. There's also a norm that says men cannot be abused by females, because the whole criminal code is written to reflect the kinds of crimes that men tend to do, which are often more visible and obvious. Females tend to use manipulation, lies, covert behavior, shaming as forms of abuse, and those aren't really captured in the criminal code. There's also this norm that says men in positions of authority should protect women and children. So this is a kind of white knight phenomenon. The police officer hears a story from a crying woman who seems to be in distress, and he wants to go in and be her protector. This is a noble way to be, but it's something that can be exploited if the woman's not telling the truth. There's also a norm that says male sexuality is inherently suspect. It's from internalized shame that men carry. It's from the shaming that women perpetrate on men. So this will come up all the time in cases of false allegation of sexual assault. There's forms of self-expression that males have at their disposal that are considered inherently suspect. And this is a form of, I would say, degrading male power that's quite common in the culture. And then, of course, since the Me Too era, there's this "we will believe the victim" stuff that's everywhere, without acknowledging that at law, there is no victim until guilt has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. The proper term is complainant, not victim. And then finally, there's this norm that places lawyers and judges above other people because of their specialized training. So we tend to believe what the lawyer and judge says too much. And that can involve individuals who don't have that specialized training degrading their own power. So I feel it's really important, because this norm is in place, to stay in touch with your gut, to endorse your own intelligence. You might not have all the legal language, you might not know how the legal system works, but you know what you know. And you have access to your own truth and to the truth about situations. So not to abandon that. Yeah, I wanted to mention all those norms because there's always a way to counter them, to be proud of who you are as a man in a real way. It doesn't mean not being responsible for your dark side, but to take pride in maleness, to love yourself as a man, because that will be the best antidote to a lot of the anti-maleness that comes up in the legal system. And love means disciplining yourself, of course. All right, the next part of the legal system is procedure. So there's this line in a Lou Reed song. First thing you learn is that you always gotta wait. Everything takes longer than you think it should in navigating the legal system. So patience will be your best friend. And so if you can master patience, and then also study procedure, look up the family law rules in Ontario, know the rules of criminal procedure, learn how the protocols work. That'll make you feel a little bit less disoriented inside a bizarre system. The other thing I think is important to note is that procedure is used as an instrument of control and power in the legal system. So if you feel enraged by the various procedures, the forms you have to fill out, the wait periods, all the little rules that seem to restrict every part of your behavior, if you feel aggressive or irritated by that, that's an appropriate reaction, because I would say legal procedure is a form of passive aggression often, that lawyers or the judges can use to their advantage. So if you know that, and you know that a normal, natural reaction to passive aggression is to get pissed off, then you can discipline yourself. You can say, yes, this is power and control. Yes, it pisses me off, and I'm going to choose a different response mechanism. Because whether it's criminal court or family court, you do yourself a favor by seeming sane and calm no matter what, even if you're being provoked to a point where even a saint would lose their shit. So, yeah, I just wanted to name procedure as a clear instrument of control and power so that I could normalize the irritation that you feel in the face of it, and then encourage you to overcome that instinctual reaction and be calm even when you're being made to wait endlessly. Finally, I just wanted to say that most courthouses in Ontario have a family law information center attached to them, which a lot of people don't know. So go into the court, ask about the family law information center, and use it. So if you have a lawyer in criminal court, chances are the lawyer is burnt out, tired, and unmotivated. And so you'll have to be proactive in asking questions about procedure. It's better to irritate your lawyer than to not inform yourself. So that way you can guide your lawyer effectively. And then again, like knowing the rules of criminal procedure, the family law rules in Ontario, those are a quick internet search. And at first, when you read them, it seems insane and complicated, but over time, as you expose yourself to them, they become a little bit less intimidating. All right, the other basic point is that you'll have a lot of liberties taken away from you. You'll have money taken from you. You'll have freedom of movement taken from you. And the opposing counsel, the social workers, a lot of people involved in the case will act like you don't have rights. That if you've been charged with an offense, you're somehow subhuman. If you've been convicted of an offense, God forbid, you don't deserve anything. And sometimes judges will even talk in this way. But it's important to remember, as problematic as the Canadian legal system is, it still has some fundamental principles in it that are good, that are protectors of the good. You still have rights, many fundamental rights. There are rights that you have that cannot be taken away. You have to fight for them because the state will frequently disregard your rights. Your ex will run roughshod over your rights. And this is especially the case if you have relatively diminished social power. So if you're accused already, you lose a huge amount of social power. The mere fact of being accused makes people look at you a different way, makes it harder to stay employed or to get a job if you're unemployed. If you're convicted, there's a whole social stigma. All these things reduce social power. If you're self-represented, you have less social power often. I've seen the case of men having to be self-represented because the ex's family has lots of money and his doesn't, so he has to self-represent because he just can't afford a lawyer. So all these things that reduce your social power also reduce your ability to fight for your rights, but it doesn't mean those rights go away. So inform yourself of them and stand up for them whenever you can and whenever it's good for you to. Sometimes it's better to roll over strategically for a little while. But I don't have the time to go through all of the rights that I think are important to know, but at every stage of your proceeding, you have the right to trial fairness. So that means if there's been an unreasonable delay, if you've been waiting a really, really long time for a trial, you could qualify to have the whole matter thrown out in certain circumstances. So it's true that you always have to wait, but you don't have to wait indefinitely. If things go on too long, then your charter right to a fair trial, which includes the right to a trial in a reasonable time, is infringed. So, and this is because the law recognizes that your basic charter right to security of the person is threatened by the anxiety and stigma of being involved in criminal proceedings. Your right to liberty is affected by all of the pretrial custody or restrictive bail conditions. And there could be fresh evidence that arises that needs to be considered in a timely fashion, because if it goes on too long, the evidence becomes less trustworthy. So that compromises your right to trial fairness. So most of you know about the Jordan principle. Basically, if it's a provincial court, your matter should be completed within 18 months, or Superior Court 30 months, but that doesn't include delays that are your fault as the defense. So just something to keep in mind. It can't go on forever. All right, I wanted to move from discussing some of those criminal law issues to discussing the family law context. So part of the problem right now is that in 2021, the Divorce Act was changed to add family violence as a consideration when the courts determine the best interests of the child, as they will when deciding who has parenting or decision-making time with the children. And similar changes were made. This is Ontario specific. It's similar in BC right now, to the Children's Law Reform Act, adding family violence as something that can be invoked to deny access to children for the person who's been, so in some cases, only accused of family violence. There've been no convictions. It hasn't been tested by cross-examination in a family law trial. So sometimes the mere accusation of family violence can be used in interim family court decisions to deny fathers access to their children. It's been affirmed at the Supreme Court of Canada also. And some of this is because family violence has been a huge problem in the past, and men have been the perpetrators of it. So as men of honor, it remains important to stand up for women and children and also other men who are equally the victims of violence from men, but not at the cost of eroding the truth. So unfortunately, these legal developments can make the court read violence too broadly, leading to interpretations of behavior as violence that tend to work against men. I can't say this enough. Conflict is not abuse. Being an asshole is not abuse necessarily. The widening of the definition of family violence is in keeping with a culture-wide trend to see any conflict as abuse, to see any unpleasant behavior as traumatizing. The obsession with safe spaces, which often just means passive-aggressive, controlling female behavior, dominates, and anytime a man raises his voice, he's called an abuser. So in the face of this insanity, it's good to remember that getting angry is not abuse. Having a passionate nature is not abuse. Being a less than perfect partner is not abuse. So perfection is not the standard, even though it's often held out to be by women who want to manipulate men's weaknesses to perpetrate even worse abuse than the harm that might have been caused by his weakness. But given the court's widening of the definition of abuse, you need to tread very, very carefully throughout the court proceedings. And you're actually going to be required to exhibit what I would say are unhealthy levels of restraint, just to be read as safe. This means you're going to have to control your emotions, I think, beyond what's natural. It's unfortunate, but you really need to play it where it lies and be seen no matter what as the sane, reasonable one, even if you're being provoked beyond belief. So in the public sphere, when dealing with your ex-partner, with the court, with authorities, you have to seem incredibly in control of your emotions. But I would say having that level of control over your emotions isn't psychologically healthy. So you will also have to find healthy ways to express reality, but just do it outside the court's playing field. Conflict is not abuse. Okay, so at family law, it's presumed that time with both parents is in the best interest of the children unless family violence is present. So because of these changes to the law that make family violence something that can be used to justify denying men access to their children, there's a sort of incentive for women to prove family violence, even if it wasn't there. And some of this is just straight up malicious, but some of it is because women have been influenced by the trauma culture to think that just basic people having emotions is abusive, and maybe it's a trigger from childhood. I don't pretend to know what goes on in the recesses of many people's minds. But I think just as citizens interested in cultivating a better future, we have to keep reiterating the reality that conflict is not abuse. However, we live in a world where everything almost is called violence, so we have to be careful, and you have to be especially careful as men, because raising your voice or getting angry can be used against you, whereas the woman's lies and manipulation tend to not have the same consequences, at least not yet. On the flip side of the coin, the widening of the definition of family violence opens the door for parental alienation to be potentially seen for the abuse that it is. And courts are beginning to tie parental alienation with family violence for the purposes of amendments to the Divorce Act and the Children's Law Reform Act, which is potentially good. It's not happening that often, but it does happen a little bit. So there are some recent Ontario court decisions in which the conduct of a parent who failed to allow the child to have separate feelings for the other parent has been seen as a form of controlling family violence. And I've dropped some of those cases in here. So this is good news for those of you who have suffered from parental alienation. It potentially means that you can at least make an argument in family court that there's been family violence if there's been parental alienation. Yeah, I feel like it can't really be said enough that parental alienation is abuse. And I took this quote from a recent Manitoba court decision because I think it really speaks to the abuse that is parental alienation really well. It's an abusive practice. It's child abuse when it occurs. It's emotionally abusive. It cripples and stunts children's development because the reality they knew at one point is undermined by this process, the process of parental alienation. So just recently, like a few months ago, there's a new Ontario Supreme Court decision that very, very clearly ties this line of reasoning about parental alienation being abuse to the provisions about family violence in the Divorce Act, and finds that parental alienation is clearly a form of family violence. So that's good news, because it means there's at least precedent for the courts finding family violence when there's parental alienation, and then potentially reversing a status quo custodial relationship. That would mean like the woman's taken the kids, engaged in parental alienation, and reversing this to reverse custody. It's not very common that this will happen, but it will happen. I'm not holding out hope, but the fact that it's starting to happen a little bit in the courts is a positive trend that should be encouraged. The problem is that it's harder to convince a court that family violence is present in the form of parental alienation if your spouse has made allegations of violence against you. And I feel like the courts need to distinguish between forms of violence. It actually does a complete disservice to actual victims of domestic abuse to say that a man who's punched a wall in anger is an abuser. Maybe he's just punched the wall in anger because he got frustrated. He needs to do some, needs to do a bit of work on himself, but that's a completely different situation from a long-term pattern of severe domestic violence. The courts don't distinguish between forms of violence. You could have an assault charge from a relatively minor event that's often seen by the court in the same light as a much more severe assault that actually leads to bodily harm. So the court doesn't really distinguish between types of violence. So that means that if you have assault charges or convictions from a relatively minor incident, I'm not minimizing like assault, but there's different gradations that could play against you. Nobody has to be perfect, but you lost your temper and acted in a less than skillful way, but it wasn't that severe. There's no world in which that's the equivalent of having your children stolen from you and suffering from false allegations of more extreme charges and then being sent to jail for several years. So the court is bad at weighing things out. It does a bad job of balancing things. All right, so the legal field being what it is, it's a crapshoot at best, and I wish all of you the best of luck. I hope in all of your legal dealings it goes extremely well for you, for your children, for all the people in your life, including your exes. I do hope that, but I also don't have that much faith in the legal system as a place where just outcomes are delivered on a routine basis. So the reality is it's a crapshoot at best. So you have to take charge of a domain that you actually have control of. And that would be yourself, your personal life, the way you relate to reality. Lots in the legal system will be completely outside of your control. And some of it may change, and Gavin's doing good work to help those changes, and so are a lot of other people, but some of it won't change. So what do we do in the face of that? Okay, first question is this question of to get a lawyer or not to get a lawyer. Lawyers are expensive and very often unreliable. You can do it all yourself, even in a criminal proceeding, people do, but that will also cost you in terms of time, energy, and a steep learning curve. So this thing is going to take from you no matter what. There's the third option, which is not fighting. And that's valid also. It just depends on you. I think making a decision about whether you get a lawyer, whether you fight this thing to the death, whether you do it yourself, whether you roll over on certain aspects of the battle to preserve your sanity. All of those are personal decisions and ones only you can make. But I think any of these are valid options and all of them are going to cost you. That's the reality. But there's something to be gained from every option as well. There's growth through this, as I'll discuss a little later. So I want to move us out of the terrain of the legal field. Inside the legal field, everything is reaction and response to a world that's outside of your control largely. There's some things you can control, but there's a whole bunch of things you can't. So what can you control? You can control how you are inside yourself in response to what's happening around you. So I describe this goal as surviving the apocalypse with basic sanity intact. It doesn't mean you get your children. It doesn't mean you maintain the level of financial health that you'd like. It doesn't mean your identity is even the same. But basic sanity is something that can survive all of this. It can survive the loss of children. It can survive the loss of financial freedom. It can survive even if you end up in jail for a while. So in many of my discussions with the wonderful men from the Canadian Centre for Men and Families, there's some truths that we came to in discussing some of the hardest situations for which there didn't seem to be any positive outcome. And one reality is that your children will grow up. And when they do, you want to be the kind of person they can count on, respect, look up to. So it's a long game. And having a focus on who you can become in 10 years or 20 years when your adult children see you face to face, or not even your children, the other people in the future that you can influence. I think it's important to think of fatherhood as not just a biological thing. It's about a quality of leadership. It's about a quality of inhabiting the kind of authority you have the capacity to be as a man and a human being. So you become the force of justice that's lacking in the legal system. You become the force of sanity that's lacking in your ex. You become the source of reliability that's lacking in the police or children's services. You become the kind of sovereign power that actually has the capacity to command the life around you in directions that support what it is you want to develop in the world. But that takes time. So how, in the middle of all of this, can you keep developing in that direction? So one thing that I have seen is that, I mean, and I'm a poor exponent of this, but do not expend resources on petty battles. Focus on winning the war. And the war is won, I would say, when you maintain your basic sanity, no matter what's being thrown at you. It's a big ask, and I don't mean to trivialize it, but it's important. Your value as a man is going to be reduced by this process. The value of what you have to give is going to be reduced. So I'd like to reverse that by saying that each and every one of you has something incredible to give to the world, and I want you to fight for it. And I want you to fight for it by not giving too much away to people who can't respond to you, to a system that can't respond to you. So enough, but not too much when engaging with the enemy. All right, so I want to talk about a few strategies to stay strong in the middle of something that seems designed in many instances to completely destroy you. So make friends and allies. Your ex in many cases will have alienated you not only from your children, but also from your friends and other family. The fact of having criminal charges will often make a lot of people just distance themselves from you, because people are ignorant about this sort of thing. They hear domestic abuse, they hear sexual assault, they think you're a monster without even knowing anything about it. And so this situation will be inherently isolating, but everyone does worse in isolation. So it's important to combat this by actively seeking out new friends and allies who get what you're going through. You might be in a completely different universe in terms of your social circles. It might be a completely different set of people that you're relating to, but make friends. And I would also say, to be my experience with the men at the Canadian Centre for Men and Families, is it's important to be careful who you share your story with. Not everyone's worthy of your truth, and this includes the court and the legal system. You have to say what you need to say to get through the legal proceedings, but to hope that the judge will hear you, to hope that the child services worker will get who you are as a father. It's kind of an empty hope. Not everyone is worthy of your truth, so share selectively. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to be seen for the man you are, not the man that your ex in the system wants to make you out to be. But be careful about sort of needing to show who you are, because those who don't get you can't really be convinced. So invest in those who do see you, and invest generously actually in the friends and allies who have your back as you're walking through this, because those are the kinds of people you want around you anyway. So it's accepting the loss of multiple relationships, multiple betrayals, multiple acts of misrecognition, people not seeing you for what you are. But it can be combated by turning your face away from the force of destruction towards the things that want to support you. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm saying it is probably in the long haul necessary for survival. Simple things like that everybody knows, but nobody does reliably when they're under stress. Exercise, eat well, drink water. Your goal is to survive what will inevitably be a long war of attrition. So you've got to feed your machine with what it runs on: healthy movement, good nutrition, enough water. Your ex will likely have caused you to internalize self-hatred, and the legal proceedings will compound this. You'll be faced with prosecutors who think you're a child molesting rapist just because your ex made some allegations. You'll be faced by a lot of projections of hatred. You have to not internalize this self-hatred. So one of the forms that internalized self-hatred takes is resisting taking care of yourself. It's like a subtle act of going along with your perpetrator. So stop. Make it a discipline to care for yourself like you're a thoroughbred racehorse, like you're worth betting on, like you're worth it beyond belief, especially now, especially when you're targeted from a bunch of sides by people who think the opposite of what's true of you. So feed yourself as if who you are in the future matters, as if you're the father of the person you're going to become, no matter what your ex, the courts, or the public in general say. It's not selfish, it's preserving yourself so that when you're free to give in the future, you can give it full power, because the future needs you, and it needs you at as full capacity as possible. It's also important to discipline your mind. So if you think about all this court shit, the injustice of the system, the injustice of a betrayal so deep, there's not really a way of conceptualizing how a person that you're deeply in love with can turn around and try to ruin your life. But if you think about it all the time, it will ruin you. So I don't know what you're going to do. I don't know your life, but you have to develop a mental discipline that lets you focus on the things in life that are still good. So the shitstorm of the ex and the legal system doesn't become all your mind knows. So whatever works for you, meditate, go to church, take up a martial arts discipline, like keep a journal of what you're grateful for, learn a new skill, whatever, something so that this big mess isn't all that your mind knows. Because you can't let it consume your mind, because if you let it, it will. And then the final thing that I want to say, and I don't mean this to sound harsh, it maybe is harsh, but in my experience walking with the men through the Canadian Centre for Men and Families, in my experience surviving the circumstances in my own life, it's possible to view everything as training, to keep asking, how can you use everything that is happening to you to grow? And challenge, in my experience, is not enough for growth. You also need nourishment. So you can grow in self-awareness, you can grow in your capacity to endure, you can grow in terms of your sense of humor. You can use this entire situation as the initiation chance of a lifetime to become something that you had no idea you could become. It'll shatter your ideas of who you thought you were going to become and present something completely different. And it's possible that the thing that you become through this is better by far than what you thought you could be when everything was on track. That's a possibility. This can be a fast track to the deepest growth possible. But for it to be that, you actually have to survive it. And to survive it, you need enough nourishment so that the challenges you're faced with don't overcome you. And some of the nourishment I talked about was making sure you have friends and allies around you, drinking water, all that kind of stuff. But whatever it is that brings more beauty to your life, whatever it is that brings more goodness, whatever it is that brings more peace into your life, add those things, because this will be a long battle. It already has been for many of you, and you never know what the next challenge will be. So you might feel like a desperate houseplant in a dark apartment, but you have to reach for nourishment like your life depends on it, because it does. And it has to be actual nourishment. Otherwise, you'll go to the flip side of nourishment, which is addiction, reaching for the things that seem good but are bad. So feed yourself well. Finally, and not to sound too woo-woo here, but in my experience with the men through the Canadian Centre for Men and Families and the men I've known who've gone through the false allegation situation in particular, there's a kind of deep mystery in this thing. There's a mystery in which your ex is a reflection of you, of a part of you that you have to come to terms with. So if she's not going away, if she's making your life hell, you just have to deal with it. There's no way through but through. And I will say this doesn't mean accepting her abuse. And administrative abuse through false allegations is one of the worst kinds of abuse there is. But what I want to say is you don't have to accept her abuse as a sign of what you deserve, because it's not. You deserve so much better than what's happened to you. You deserve a better legal system. You deserve better lawyers. You deserve better women, actually. There's a call to women who actually care about men to grow up. That's what women need to do now, to grow up and stop being so childish and stop ruining the lives of men. We owe that on behalf of the love we have for men. We owe that to men as mature women who give a shit about the future. But all of this means that you're going to have to look within eventually to see how moving forward you're going to relate to the feminine differently. And so you can start with yourself, like, how do you relate to your own feelings, to your sense of beauty, to your creativity? These things have been crushed in men. They've been crushed in women too, which is why a lot of women are stuck as basically infantile teenagers projecting their rage onto good men. But these things can be resurrected even in the desert of false allegations and everything. What would it mean to cultivate a relationship to your feeling side? How do you add more beauty? How do you honor the part of you that's creative, maybe a part that got shut down a long time ago? So what I've seen in my experience is that answering these questions day by day will put you in touch with your feminine side. And when you're in touch with that, I've seen that men tend to be less prone to hostile takeovers from the women in the world who seem to want to ruin your life. All right, so just to conclude, many women will use the lethal combination of false allegations plus family court battle as a reaction to a relationship gone wrong. And it'll try to destroy you. The legal system is a problem. This will be long no matter what, but success is possible if you focus on the long term, on what you can be in 10 years and 20 years, on what you can be right now inside this moment, by what it's possible to still become. And a clue seems to be to commit to growing through this no matter what, to seeing differently, to being differently. It might take the strength of a warrior and the sanity of a saint, but it's possible. So not just by muscling through, but by adding enough nourishment so that you can support your growth. Muscling through with willpower isn't enough. You have to water the garden. So I wish you luck, and I'm going to open it up for questions now and stop sharing.
First of all, I just want to say thank you very much. That was an amazing presentation. Kristen, you speak so eloquently, and I love the analogies that you draw. They make things very real. If anybody has questions that they want to pose to Kristen, you can either raise your hand or you can put them into the chat. I think one of the things that kind of struck me about early in your presentation, Kristen, you talked about a woman doing something that would kind of prod a man into crossing a line into something that could be determined as assaultive behavior. And I think you mentioned, like, there's a very loose definition for what abuse is or what violence is now under the interpretation in the, certainly not in the criminal code, but the interpretation according to Stats Can is that family violence could be threatening to harm your partner's pet or the family pet. Like, that could be family violence. So just uttering a threat that I'm going to kick your cat or something to that effect could ultimately end up in jail. So with that kind of broad definition of abuse, or that broad definition of violence, I guess where would you start with kind of advising people? And I guess I'm kind of leaning back on what you said about, being an asshole isn't abuse, or having a dispute is not abuse. Like, what kind of direction would you give people in terms of navigating that, the nuances of that?
Well, what I would say is you have to know your partner well, because it's intense to be in love with somebody. It's intense to be close to somebody, and stuff will come up. Um, we live inside a giant cultural wound when it comes to intimacy and relationships and sex, and things will come up, moments will get heated. Everyone's going to yell sometimes. So you want to be with a partner you can trust, not to go to the police just because, you know, her dog's pissed on your carpet and you say, Jesus fucking Christ, I hate that thing. Like, so, I mean, that's not like, I'm saying, I mean, of course, everyone should become the Buddha and be perfect at all times, but that's not humanity. Humanity is we bump up against each other, we get mad. And you should know who you're sleeping with well enough as men, eventually over time, so that she's not going to do that. Now that's a big ask. We are where we are, and women will sort of snap with time sometimes and use small things against you as revenge, and are supported by the system in doing that, which is unfortunate. But you've got to be really careful. Got to be really, really careful. You've got to be really careful. I have a passionate nature. I lost my temper many times in my intimate relationships. So not perfect at all. And I don't think the requirement of perfection actually does anybody any good at all. But don't say you're going to kill her dog. Don't damage her property. Don't punch a wall. If you got to take martial arts or anger management or cognitive behavioral therapy or meditation or whatever you need to do, like, you got to learn to control your temper. It'll be good for you anyway. So the good news is, yeah, the family law regime sucks, and there's a lot of things that'll be read as violence that aren't. But the flip side of that is you can use that as fuel for your growth and get a hold of your emotions through whatever means possible, which is probably good to do anyway.
Fair enough. Okay, we got a couple people with hands raised. Will Comer, you're first, and then Chris Fowler, you're up next, and then Will Vey, you're after that. So Comer, go ahead. Chris, do you want to go ahead while Will's sorting out his microphone? Sorry, you're on. There you go.
And I'm on mute too. Sorry, Kristen. Really nice to see you. It's been a long time, and yeah, I appreciate you being here. Oh man, yeah. I'm kind of having a bad day too today. But so Kristen, you said a couple things. I'll try to straighten myself out here. A couple things that I just wanted to touch on. So, not knowing the process, so I had CAS threatening to remove my kids from my house, and I'd never been, in any kind of court really. So not knowing the process, and I mean, I had a lawyer, my ex-wife had a lawyer, my kids had a lawyer, and so there was a lot of expense with that, and I 100% agree with you that you have to weigh out your resources. And I was also at the same time involved in a criminal case. And looking back on it now, I think I should have focused more on the criminal case and self-rep in family court. I do think that was really good advice not self-rep, but yeah, just kind of weigh out your resources and where they're most needed. The second thing I just wanted to touch on from your presentation, staying in contact with your lawyer. I can't remember how you worded it, but I think that it was really well worded. That you know, it's better to annoy your lawyer and understand what's going on than to not understand. I learned that really well from my first two lawyers who did very little on my criminal case, and when I finally moved on to the third lawyer that repped me and in my trial, yeah, I was in contact with him, you know, once, twice, sometimes 3 times a week. I would show up at his office, and yeah, so yeah, I think that's really good advice, and guys need to do that. Yeah, stay in touch and really know what's going on, because you know you're in a position where everything has been taken away from you, and you really don't know the process or what's happening. So yeah, no, I just think that's really good advice, and really I raise my hand just to thank you for coming. But
I thank you too, really quickly, Kristen. I know there's lots of people that want to see you, but like it's an honor to see you. I've been doing little things here and there, and just hearing the sound of your voice is so reassuring and calming. You have a beautiful persona, and we miss you like crazy. Yeah, I just think I only have one thing to say, but I think it's really important to look at somebody and how they treat their worst enemy. And when you see that they treat their worst enemy horribly, or maybe really good, I don't know, whatever it is, you're going to be on the other side of that if you're in an intimate relationship. So if they're not nice to the people that they don't like, they're going to be really not nice to you. It's a good measure, in my opinion.
Thank you so much. Okay, I think looks like Will's got his microphone sorted out. Will, do you want to?
Hopefully, can you hear me?
Yeah, got you now.
Okay. So essentially, oh, I'm getting some reverb here. 1 second. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, that'll work better. I had 2 things going through my ear before. So it was regarding the note that was made about the norm that places lawyers and judges above other people because they're specialized training. And that got me thinking about the notion that justice must not just be done, but seem to be done, and that neither bias nor the appearance of bias can be present in any judicial official. Now, if there is a norm that perhaps argument that's made by self-represented litigants ought to be treated as inferior to the same argument made by a lawyer, that would inherently infuse the justice system with an appearance of bias when there's self-represented litigants in the courtroom. So I guess the question would relate to, you know, what does, you know, that norm do with respect to, you know, the court system and how matters are adjudicated, given that lawyers and self-represented persons are not expert witnesses under oath to testify on the law. They're representing these parties and bringing matters to the court's attention to avoid errors of law by judges not being aware of certain cases and such. So I don't know if that's maybe too broad, but perhaps touch on that.
Well, just to kind of to offer a simple answer, it's not really good if you're a self-rep in terms of how the judge sees you, and you don't tend to get treated as well. But sometimes it's worth it because you get to represent yourself actually, and I mean that, like, you actually get to speak on your own behalf and lobby on your own behalf in a way that a lawyer never would. So from the perspective of like justice being seen to be done, it's also important from the perspective of the person going, like, from you, if you're going through family court or criminal court, it's also important for you to feel like the process is just. So as just as possible. So if you feel like by representing yourself, you can get your truth out there in a way that you couldn't before a judge, that's valuable in and of itself. And it does make its way through the court decision, the legal system slowly, and self-represented litigants do. They provide an example, and they can sometimes instruct judges in important ways. It might not seem like the judge is listening, but you can speak through the court to the judge, and the judge is also a human being, so there's certain education that you can provide as a self-rep, because you can do things lawyers can't do, that I think is really, really valuable. So I just want to put into the chat, I've started writing these legal briefs that speak to various issues that might arise in the family or criminal court contexts, as a way of sort of bridging the gap between the specialized training that lawyers and judges have and what self-reps go through. So I have this like website Gumroad e-commerce thing where I'm putting legal briefs, and I'm very open to, if people want me to do a brief on a certain subject, I can do it and put it up there. So I'll put that there just for now. I don't know that I answered your question, William, but there are certain precepts within the legal system, like justice should be seen to be being done, and a whole bunch of other actually really good things that they're not completely erased from the legal system. And sometimes self-reps can reintroduce those principles in ways that lawyers won't, because lawyers want to look cool to their friends, the Crown Counsel, or their friends, the other lawyers. And self-reps can sometimes be more vigorous advocates of the law than a lawyer can be, because you don't have to answer to the rest of the legal profession.
I guess what I was looking, to address, and you addressed it kind of partially there, was how can justice be seen to be done with a self-represented litigant in the courtroom if there's an inherent bias against them? Therefore, unless there's a jury trial, could there be justice being seen to be done with a accused who happens to be self-represented, for instance? Maybe that's more specific there, because if say you had the more clear cases, say you had a person of one ethnic background and a person of another, and they're both the parties of a proceeding, and there's a bias against one because persons who happen to be a certain color tell the truth and don't tell the truth. Well, that would be an appearance of bias. Or certain persons are uneducated versus others. In this case, you have a situation of here's a self-represented person. They're assumed to not know the law, so they're assumed that whatever they say doesn't need to be given equal weight. And if a judicial official is not giving equal weight to argument and assessing it on its merits, could a fair trial occur? And then if not, what does that mean? Because self-represented persons are entitled to be present in the courtroom. If the vast majority, hypothetically, of judges, if this is the norm, treat them a certain way, could only a small subset of judges actually hear the matters of self-represented litigants in order to have fair trials?
Well, I would just say that the term inherent bias, it assumes that the bias is complete. And I don't think with dealing with a legal system in general, nothing is complete. It's not a closed system. There's broad tendencies in general. Judges don't like self-represented litigants because they don't do things the normal way. But there's always cracks in the armor where the truth can go through. So the bias isn't so extreme, I wouldn't say, to say it's inherent. It's a tendency towards that bias, but it's not totalized, and it still is possible to speak to the judge. It's not likely. It's not likely as a self-represented litigant that you're going to be seen that favorably by the judge, but sometimes it's fairer than having a lawyer represent you who you either can't afford or who doesn't represent you. So the legal system is not perfect, and it never will be perfect. It has tons of problems. So it's just what makes the trial seem the most fair to you is often the question, like having agency over your own life? Does it seem fair to spend $200,000 on a defense lawyer? Or does it seem fair to kind of go with a legal aid person who doesn't really have time to care about you? Or does it seem fair to maybe have a legal aid person who does some of the stuff, but you do some of the other stuff? I would say it's just a case by case situation in which you can reclaim the idea of fairness, because we're not going to perfect the system, but we can refine how we are in relationship to it. That's what I would say.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, we could have courts where, you know, there aren't really lawyers, everyone's self-representing themselves, and the judges are trained to interact with self-represented litigants. Well, that would probably be much better. But until we're there, like, yeah, if you are representing yourself in criminal court, good luck. I think it's pretty bold and definitely possible.
So I think I'm going to jump in here just really quickly. I mentioned a comment that you made earlier, Kristen, to kind of you defined what lawyers and sometimes judges do as, you know, passive aggressive behavior. And the lawyer who sits in on our Tuesday night legal clinics, Carrie Lynn, said, you know, it's very important to expect that passive aggressive behavior as a form of abuse and identify it as such. So there's the old saying, you know, you name it to tame it. If you come to expect that kind of abuse from, you know, especially if you're self-represented, if you come to expect that kind of abusive behavior from your from opposing counsel, if your ex is represented, it doesn't tend to activate or trigger you in the same way. So I really appreciated that comment. You said, you know, really, it almost, you need to normalize it, that it's just a behavior that's going to happen, regardless of whether you like it or not. And when Carrie was talking one Tuesday, he said, you know, when I was in court, it was my job to piss off my friend, like the other lawyer's client. I would do things to, like, specifically poke that other person's client. So when you realize that that's what the lawyer does, and it becomes this kind of passive aggressive dance where they're trying to poke you and trying to poke you and trying to poke you until such time as you exhibit some kind of abusive behavior or fly off the handle in court, it becomes easier to kind of ground yourself when you just, you know, that's just a tactic that they use. So yeah, I appreciate that. Next up for a question was William V. Go ahead.
Hey everyone, I just wanted to, I have to drop off the call at 1:30 for another call, but I really wanted to thank everyone that's here as a community supporting this, and those that put this together. These things are so meaningful. And Kristen, I'm not going to be able to say properly how much that presentation just meant to me, but you captured so much that I've experienced. I've been in this world dealing with this now for 5 years. And it's great when I can talk to people that have also been through it. But when someone stands sort of professionally on the sidelines with so much experience and knowledge and can speak to us as to, you know, comprehensively what this is like to go through this, it means the world. Because you're not only giving practical suggestions, you're talking about surviving this. You're talking about the challenges we're going to come up to. And I've been there, where I've been in a good place thinking I'm doing okay with this, and then all of a sudden, one thing I think it's important to mention is how cyclical this is, because you can go through this when you're engaged with it for like a few months, like in a part of the legal part, and then it drops, and all of a sudden you're not dealing with it for 3 or 4 months, and then you have to ramp up to deal with the next aspect of it, and then it drops again, and that cycle can be. There's sometimes I've found I just almost mental health wise cannot bring myself up to meet it again because it seems endless. And you really seem to grasp and understand that piece of it. And the other part I wanted to talk about is how the system works against you as well, because I ended up with a lawyer where he literally was saying to me, when I was telling him the behavior that my partner had done, he was like, no one's going to believe that. The man is always the guy that's the problem. And he basically said all the stereotypes that we talk about in here. And I felt like nobody understands, nobody hears what's happening here. And then he kind of beat me down to plead. And now I'm left with the compound situation where not only am I saying I went through this abusive situation, now I'm saying I went through a lawyer that misrepresented me. And so it's almost like now I look even worse because it looks like I'm the one with all these different issues when really the source of the issues was all the same. And it's the process that's compounded it. And to hear someone like, I know that you're not on the outside of this, but someone that's looking at it, that's not living in it, that understands that it's a breath of fresh air because you know, there's times that I'm low and just groups like this and hearing someone like that just gives me hope. And I am in the process of, I've been through a dip, but I'm trying to ramp up to the next element of an appeal. And it's that nourishment part you talked about, taking care of yourself. Man, I really feel how valuable that is now because surviving it is the most important thing. And I've had glimpses of that growth you've talked about. And I'm like, yes, I'm a better person in many ways, but I also feel that, you know, a month from now, I could be dipping again and I could feel like this could destroy me. And so those ups and downs, just surviving that, like you really spoke to my experience. So thank you so much. And thank you all for being here again.
Thank you, William. It's good to meet you.
Thanks, Will. Frank, you get the next question. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kristen, again. I like the way that you summarize the general strategy, which you know, it is pretty well representing what's out there. But I also want to ask you because often it's like the key strategy is to put the for instance, say the father in the defense with say false allegation, whatever they are, so that you know the next element is to get like interim custody and basically adopt and convince a judge of enough of a status quo for custody so that later it becomes full custody of the children, decision making, you know, for school, for medical, for everything. So really the father becomes at best an uncle, you know, with visitation. And so since the criminal aspect has, from what you said, even at the allegation stage, an impact on ultimately what happens in family court, as the judge basically it's good enough for them to decide against the father on just allegations alone. What's the likelihood of adopting a different strategy? That is there any success sort of postponing family law case pending a resolution of criminal aspect, or whichever combination it is? Maybe it's best to do both at the same time or in reverse order. I'm not sure. Delay the criminal court to so that the family court matter doesn't get tainted, you know, with any of the allegations that are not proven. So I just like to get your response on that, if possible.
Well, it's hard to say, Frank. I think it's hard to say which. The thing is, there've been so many delays in criminal proceedings in the last few years since COVID. It was bad before, so it can just be hard to get a criminal trial. Like people are waiting long periods of time, and in the meantime, you're right. There's these interim orders that give custody to the mom before there's even been a family court trial. So it's sometimes hard to decide when the criminal matter will proceed because you don't really have a lot of choice in that. So that's one thing. The other thing is the family court has a different standard of proof than the criminal court. So you could be acquitted of a bunch of things in criminal court, but then the family trial will reopen those allegations, because the standard in family court is the civil standard of the balance of probabilities. And transcripts from criminal court can be used as evidence in family court. So that's important just to keep in mind. So you might be acquitted, found not guilty by the criminal court judge, but then the family court judge reopens the stuff and says, oh, well, on the balance of probabilities, I think this did happen, which creates another problem. So yeah, I don't know what to tell. There's
So-
not, the best solution really is to become the best dad you can be, even if you're not ever going to see your kids again, which is so brutal. That's such a brutal thing for me to say, but it's the only way. So whatever way of engaging with the court stuff is the easiest on you, that's what you should do. Because but by easy, I don't mean like comfortable. I mean easy, like whatever strategy makes you the best person you could be, that's what you should do, because you have to be the best dad anyway, even if you don't see your kids. It's so, and it's a crapshoot at best. Like it unfortunately really is. And criminal court is better than family court, I would say. There's less bullshit in it, and there's more standards, and the lawyers who practice criminal law have a little bit more oversight. Like the Crown is going to be appealed more regularly. There's family law lawyers have less respect for the law and are kind of just operating without much oversight, and can be just a goddamn, excuse me, nightmare to deal with.
So as the family,
yeah, family court. So yeah, so there's I don't know what to tell you other than like just yeah, I don't have any. I wish I had a good solution. Yeah.
second question, if you don't mind, I suppose, like maybe, I don't know, you've heard of cases where, you know, if say it was dealt in family law first, because yes, it can take longer delays in criminal court. Like maybe some of the material family court, you know, like transcript, can be used in criminal court.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so that's also a possibility. But
Yeah.
but the
Yeah.
second question I have is uh, touching further on the point of representation. You know, either self-representing or by a lawyer. But I'm just wondering if you had like some figures on the proportion of people, say men, in this case, represent themselves in terms of percentage. Because like what the information I got is that it was so costly and taking so many years that it really forced like a lot of people to be like overwhelmed with cost and time and everything, and so like apparently there's a large number of people self-represent because of all the excessive costs and the way the system work or don't work as we wish, and so I'm just wondering if you have numbers on that. And the other point, perhaps I'd like to share what my experience was in family court. Is initially I was being represented, but because it cost so much, and I gained more experience, then the lawyer agreed to coach me. So that's another alternative for those people want to self-represent, but you know, you get like your legal paper or whatever strategy cross-checked by a lawyer will be willing to coach you. You know, keep in mind they're not representing you, you know, but at least so that you're not making like critical mistakes, and you know, you're not say learning on the job, so to speak, so much. So for me, that worked well. I was able to represent myself and one of the longest trial in Ontario, 17 days in court. And so, so I learned the process, and so yeah, so that's another option that some people can do. Maybe you can comment on that. And again, if you have like an idea percentage, how many actual people actually represent themselves, given all the legal system, that's not necessarily being just like a justice system.
Well, Frank, it's what I've read most recently, it's about Canada-wide, about 50% of people self-represent in family proceedings, and in urban areas as much as 70%. So it's a lot, and good for you for self-representing through a long trial like that. That's incredible. That's it's incredible, and it can, I mean, you're living proof it can be done, and in a lot of cases it's the better way. It still costs you though, because it costs you time and effort and everything else. So
sorry to interrupt, is what's it called, incorporated under that 50%, the mediation? Like, what would encompass that self-representation? Is there a couple other faucets that are included even though we're not necessarily
I don't know, that these were just general statistics that I read, so I like a few days ago. I don't have it immediately at my disposal, and I don't know about mediation.
Okay, I've got a couple of questions in the chat. So we've got, how can someone mitigate the use of an outstanding criminal charge in family court? I think we may have kind of touched on that, tips of the waves, but any direction there, Kristen?
I would say it just comes back to the same thing, as you just want to look like the best father possible no matter what. So maintain good relations with people in the community, like have broader social networks. If your bail restrictions allow you to keep doing some kind of work, just look as trustworthy and reliable as possible, even though the stress of it makes it really hard to work. I'm not saying it's easy, but the best thing you can do is just look as good as you can, and don't do it like for the outside world. Do it for yourself. So do it to make yourself as good as possible, because the family court will always be looking at that stuff too. And it sounds crass, but if you're paying some child support, the court tends to like you better than if you're not able to. And don't get me started on how horrible the child support regime is. It's just extortion. But
Okay, thank you. Next question in the chat. Any thoughts if a change of the balance of probability standard in family court to a preponderance of evidence standard, as was done in Kentucky, would yield better outcomes in Canada?
well, I think anything that raises the standard for what's considered I don't think balance of probabilities is really the right standard in family court in the face of so many allegations. So something that acts as a buffer against false allegations would be good. The other side of the equation is that we're kind of inside this echo chamber where we're talking about false allegations. Is family violence is a real problem, and men perpetrate the more severe forms of family violence in terms of like injury and death. Women do that too, but like the courts have created these standards for a reason, because family violence is real. Men do family violence enough times, so it should be a concern. But I don't think that even in cases of actual extreme spousal abuse perpetrated by men against women, the current system doesn't actually protect women and children very well at all. So that's their justification for doing this, but the justification isn't borne out by how badly actually the system protects real victims.
Okay, thank you. Rich, you had your hand up a little while back. Did you have a question for Kristen, or was it answered already?
Hey, Gavin, you guys hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
I need about 5 minutes, but I have a comment about the intersection of criminal and family court, you know, through working on those topics, representing myself in the 18-day trial. So you can give me 5 minutes. I'm not in a place where I can speak about it right now.
Okay, well, Will's got another question, so we'll go to Will. Will, you go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it was brought up recently about one particular like standard of proof and what the change might have there. Maybe, I guess, going over briefly the various standards of proof that exist in various courts, like prima facie case, balance of probabilities, reasonable doubt, etc., and how they relate or how they differ.
Well, first of all, they're not scientific standards that the court uses at all. They're just kind of not. There's no kind of calculation on the balance of probability that's scientifically accurate at all. But beyond a reasonable doubt is the standard in criminal court, which is the highest standard of proof. And that's a high standard. And then balance of probabilities is I think in law school, they talked about that as more like 50, it's over the 50% mark, like it's 51% possible at the balance of probabilities. So it's a lower standard. It's probably possible. But in criminal court, it's beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a pretty high standard. So that means on the flip side that if you're acquitted of something because the beyond a reasonable doubt standard is the standard, you might still have done the thing. So that's why family court tries to have a different standard. If things are being dealt with fairly, it wouldn't be so much a problem. It's just that they're not. And the female forms of perpetration like parental alienation aren't considered to be abuse when they are. So it's blind to that. But it doesn't mean it shouldn't. The family law system should still look at male violence and take that into consideration. It just needs to look at it in an accurate way, not through the lens of false allegations.
Yes, on that note too, so there's two other standards I've heard of. One is a prima facie standard, and then the other, which was mentioned recently, with the preponderance of evidence. Like, where do they fit in that particular scale, or are they on like another planet in terms of like a different scale system?
Well, those two aren't habitually used in legal proceedings, so I don't really know how they fit in relationship to the other two. Your prima facie just means on the face of it. So well, yeah, I don't know how that standard works in legal proceedings.
In like private prosecutions, the standard to issue summons is a prima facie. That's their standard. So I think it has to do with my understanding is making out every element of it subject to any rebuttal of the evidence. So maybe that was what was being asked by that question about preponderance of evidence. Maybe they're similar, that one would have to have made out that thing could occur before it could be brought to the court or something like that, not just alleging it.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, I don't know about those things. It's something to look into. Thanks for bringing that up.
So Kristen, you mentioned that family violence does exist and is frequently perpetrated by men against women, and I think what you were referring to is kind of significant physical violence. I was watching Jordan Peterson, and he said that men tend to manifest aggression physically. Women tend to manifest aggression in the form of gossip, lies, innuendo, and reputation destruction. And you mentioned earlier that this is that kind of aggression, that kind of, if you want to term it, abuse or violence, isn't captured in the criminal code. Is there a way, or maybe it's, if it is captured in the criminal code, it's captured with the implicit bias that it can happen to a woman but not to a man? Is there a way that that standard could be changed, or that could be recognized in the criminal code, do you think?
It's a good question. Yeah, how do you quantify ruining a reputation, or yeah, or all the forms of, I mean, because women suffer from women's abuse too, like the lies, the manipulation, the all the female typical forms of being bad hurt women as well. It's that should be self-evident, but maybe it isn't. But yeah, the criminal code is definitely written with a male perpetrator in mind. Females do lots of the violent things as well. It's just not quite as common. So, I mean, perjury is a crime in the criminal code. There's forms of criminality that should attach to false allegations. Like somebody makes a false allegation, that's it's a form of mischief also. So but no one really prosecutes the false accusers. There's ways that they could be prosecuted against. You're not allowed to lie in a legal proceeding. It's perjury, but it doesn't really get prosecuted. I don't really think that the legal solutions to all this are ultimately the appropriate solutions. I don't think the law is at all well equipped to deal with interpersonal conflict of this kind at all. And I don't necessarily think that demonizing anyone, whether it's male or female, is the solution. There's behavior that needs to be corrected. I'm more interested in corrections, I think, than I am in legal solutions. And part of it is like when fathers are in the lives of children and the fathers are encouraged to be healthy, fathers will typically play a corrective role. And without that corrective role, all sorts of criminal or antisocial behavior creeps up. So it goes down the generations. And fathers have abused their corrective role through being just outright abusive. So men need to correct themselves and be corrected so that they can, be good fathers and good correctors. So yeah, I don't know that legal solutions are the solutions.
Fair enough. Okay, we're coming up on time here. I know, Frank, you got one more question. Just before we go there, we recently connected with some fairly high-profile social media influencers and created something called liesruinlives.com. And it's a worldwide rally for family law reform. We launched it 2 days ago. We've got several hundred people who have signed up for it already that are looking to host rallies in their cities. It's certainly worth looking into, and there's certainly strength in numbers. So I'll post that in the chat. And then Frank, you go ahead, and then Rich, are you in a place? Just give me a thumbs up. Okay, you can talk. So Frank, quick question, then Rich, then Vlad, and we've got 10 minutes to handle all three, so please be concise. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Well, the last question I want to you to sort of like comment on is when the children are close or becoming teenagers, then the entire dynamic or rights change because they have like more rights, and so potentially they can be represented by lawyers and effectively become their mouthpiece. And so in the context of parental alienation, which is my case, I haven't seen or talked to my children 17 months, then their whole narrative or their answers to their lawyers, it becomes totally tainted as the coaching that they've been sort of like privileged to have, in a vacuum, with the other parent. So the courts will increasingly will give more weight to the opinions or the testimony of the children. So that becomes like a triangulation sort of scheme, as you try to as a parent, as a father, to advocate for what's the best for your children, but you're just like now instead of a battle, against the other parent, it's now like you're having to defend against potentially several lawyers as well. Good comment on that.
Well, in Ontario, the Office of the Children's Lawyer will often be appointed to represent the views of the children. And in my limited experience with the Office of the Children's Lawyer, they don't screen for parental alienation. They will interview children while the children are in the custody and care of the alienating parent, which is guaranteed to give an answer that isn't accurate. And then the lawyer will be pretending to speak for the child, but it's just the child saying what they need to keep mommy happy so that mommy doesn't get mad at them and they don't lose their caregiver. So it's I'm not in favor of the Office of the Children's Lawyer, generally speaking. So if you can avoid having it involved, I would. And then, yeah, the only hope when the children become teenagers is that the truth will start to dawn, and it will. It will in time, maybe not right away, but the more independence the children get from the mother and the more sense they have that they can care for themselves, the more ability they have to speak the truth. But as long as they're in the care and the custody of the alienating parent, forget it. And it's no knock on the children. They got to do what they got to do to survive. So, yeah. The OCL sucks. Or put a more enlightened way, they need some serious re-education because they're not at all aware of what the situation is when a child is with an alienating parent.
Thanks for that, Kristen. Rich, you're next, and then Vlad, you have the final question for the call.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Kristen, for giving your insights today. I just wanted to make a quick comment. I am involved with 2 family court houses. Well, one actually is completed, and I'm also involved with the criminal court. And the 2 women colluded together. And I guess my point here being, because of reverse disclosure, you might as well go all in on the family court and try to use more information. We don't have opportunities to do like pre-trial stuff oftentimes, and this gives you an opportunity. I was able to expose collusion between my 2 exes, and that's going to be used against them in the criminal matter. And I also had to represent myself after spending about $130,000, and I represented myself in an 18-day trial in Ontario and won. Now, sadly, I have a 3rd child that I'm being alienated from, and I haven't seen in many months. And apparently, there seems to be some judicial bias or something. I keep landing on the same judge who says I am not supposed to bring any matters forward until in the family court until my criminal matter is resolved. So I guess that speaks to some of the stuff you were talking about before. This idea of innocent until proven guilty, our charter rights, doesn't necessarily seem to apply as well in the family courts, and it gives a lot of leeway to the judges for interpretation. But anyways, that's all I really wanted to say. I appreciate you being here, and I'll hand it back over.
Thank you, Richard.
Vlad, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kristen, for a great presentation. Just been busy with the kids on the back end with my 2 younger ones, but I'll watch your replay too. And I guess a couple of quick comments and then maybe ask for your feedback or maybe even assistance. I've been representing myself within family court matter for my oldest son. I was the second parent to lose all parental rights just because I was opposing government's COVID mandates, etc. Back in 2020. And things escalated, long story short, over the last year and a half, where my ex brought the criminal charges for criminal harassment just for making Facebook posts on my own platform discussing the separation and alienation from my child that I didn't even see for 2 years at that point. And then what happened is, I actually was defending myself at the criminal trial, end of November of last year that just passed. And I was put in a situation where the new charges that they had for me for the breach of my original bail conditions, they separated them from the actual trial that I was there for. And then they denied me bail, again, just for the Facebook post. I'm just sharing some of the, I'm sure you have countless stories, but maybe a couple more in terms of completely, disregard for the reality of what people facing and how they have to combat all this, bias towards men. And then even just as the previous father mentioned, he's going through alienation for his younger child right now. And I'm actually battling kind of similar situation where in my new relationship, I have 2 younger daughters that you guys saw on the thing. And now I'm faced with, challenging situation in this point too. And it's interesting because it's been projected onto me as like, oh, obviously I have a pattern of behavior, right? If I'm having challenges with, mother of my older son, and now I'm having challenges with mother of my 2 daughters, and I'm thinking in my head, is that a pattern in my behavior, or is it just a common pattern in behavior of women that know that they can use the system if they choose to go to war just because we're not getting the desired outcome in a specific relationship? And all I just wanted to be left alone. I want to have a peaceful cooperating relationship with the mother of my 2 daughters. And she literally tells me, she doesn't do that. And I'm like, it doesn't matter if you do it or not. It's just a matter of this is what has to happen. Either we do it peacefully or not. So I guess maybe the question, if you're able to provide the answer to that is how prevalent. I mean, I know it, but it's just for the Zoom later recording to see how prevalent is this pattern of behavior, not necessarily from the fathers, and that's how the society will label. Well, obviously this is a troubled man because he's having problems with multiple baby mamas, so to speak, right? Or is it the system that's designed for the women to take advantage of? And I said this even to Gavin before, if the system would be flipped around, men would be taking advantage as well. But it's just obvious that the system is designed to favor women, and they know they have that opportunity. If they do go to war, the advantage is stacked for them big time, right? So I don't know, just a few things I wanted to share, maybe ask for your feedback, opinion, and maybe answer something in that regard. Thank you.
What I would say is if there's a woman who's had two male exes in her life who have abused her, like if she's been beaten by 2 separate men, we don't generally look at her and say, well, it must be you. We look at her and say, it's the patriarchy. So I would say if you have been mistreated by more than one woman, that's not an indication of there's something wrong with you necessarily. It's an indication of there being, right now, there's a certain kind of power that women have from being able to use the system. And a woman of integrity will see the power that's available to her and choose to first acknowledge it and then choose not to use it against the man she claims to love. That for me is love. It's you lay down the power that you have. It's the same as when you're with a man as a woman. If a man is bigger than you, and usually he is, then the man has the power to kill you with his bare hands. He lays down that power as an act of love for you. And so I would say, as a woman, you have to lay down that power as an act of love for the men in your life. And for me, that's why that's part of why I've been involved with the Canadian Centre for Men and Families, been involved with this work, is because I think it's important for women to name this power as power, and it's power that we have, and then to say no to using it, and also to say no to other women who choose to use this. So it's actually ultimately up to women to discipline other women and say, you don't do this. And older women too, to younger women, like to be willing to look at the younger woman and say, not on my watch, it's not tolerated. So the mothers discipline their daughters, and that's how we eventually root it out. But it's also almost not the women's fault, because it's human nature to use the power that is available to you. And if you feel threatened, you feel like you're not getting what you want, you feel like the man's abandoning you, you get desperate, you use that power. But women need to correct themselves, and men need to not be blamed if they get targeted more than once. You might want to screen your future partners better, but that's we're all living and learning. It's a long life, so there's no
That was very helpful. That was a really great insight, and that's why I do my best to be outspoken even with the backlash, just because I know like someone needs to bring attention to that, and then people who understand, like yourself, obviously not the only one, you might be far few in between, but that's how we need to speak to spread it wider, so then more people realize the true nature. So you were very eloquent in your explanation. Thank you for that.
It's good to meet you, and I wish you luck with those matters. So, yeah, it's nice to see you with your girls.
Kristen, we have one more question from Sarah. And are you okay to hang out for another 2 minutes or 3 minutes? Okay, great. Sarah, go ahead.
Hi, good morning. I just had a question about hybrid models or unbundled models, and in terms of alienated parents. And Kristen, if you had any feedback on it, or I imagine like on unbundled models, so where the alienated parent, runs their case, but then has counsel in a very limited way for the obvious reasons around, squandering resources, which is obviously a really big problem in terms of the legal system not being designed, as you rightly say, for interpersonal issues. And then I'm sure you've all heard of lots of nightmares and horror stories around alienated parents having spent having been outspent, or having been simply just being unable to afford representation. So asking about if you have any familiarity with the unbundled model or hybrid models or other, for alienated parents.
In British Columbia, there's a little bit more of a move towards unbundled legal services, or towards authorizing paralegals and other non-lawyers to provide limited services in the family law context. And for those of you who don't know, unbundled legal services just means, like put very simply, you pay for this, or this, instead of retaining the lawyer to do everything. It's like you could retain a lawyer to do a specific thing. It has a specific fee attached to it. And that's that. The law societies generally don't like the unbundled legal services because it kind of reduces the scope of lawyers' power. Lawyers really don't like non-lawyers having authority to do family law proceedings. There's a big fight in BC to even make that happen in the first place. So yeah, I think if you can go to a lawyer and ask them to do one specific thing, that's generally empowering to clients and is a good thing. But law societies tend to resist it, and not just because lawyers like to be powerful. It also introduces certain kinds of complexity, like William was talking about earlier, this bias against self-reps. It puts a bit more power in the hands of clients. And some clients are just a nightmare. So lawyers can shield judges in the system from nightmare clients in some ways that are sometimes useful. So not all bad that there's lawyers, but there's, it'd be good to be able to go to a lawyer and say, I'd like you to do this thing and this thing only, because this is what I can afford. What's the price tag? And you get it done that way. It's probably
Sorry, Sarah, was your question specifically geared towards family law from an alienation perspective and acquiring unbundled services. I know you practice law. I'm not sure what the what type of law you practice. It looks like you're a trial lawyer. Do you work in civil or in criminal?
Yeah, well, first of all, that was a really great answer. Thank you. Very helpful. And in answer to your question, yes, I'm speaking for in terms of parental alienation specifically. I do a variety of work, some trial work and motions, and I've done the unbundled model, and sometimes with success. Sometimes it's worked really well, and other times, it's not for everybody. But I'm really curious about serious solutions in that department, because I think the system is, like, as you probably already know, it can be a setup for failure for everybody involved. So are there solutions in terms of, the unbundled model? Like, is this a real solution? It seems very promising. But I guess cautiously optimistic about it. And yes, I'm interested in parental alienation specifically.
So a couple of things. Sorry to jump in here, Kristen. Tomorrow night we have U of T researcher who does a presentation on parental alienation. That's at 7 p.m. tomorrow night. So you're welcome to join that, Sarah, if it's helpful. Second thing is, about a month ago, back on December 17th, Brian Ludmer came in and did a session on dealing with false allegations specifically related to the Children's Aid Society. He'll be coming back again on February 25th, I believe, to do another Sunday session on memory science. But I'm not sure if you're familiar with Brian, but he does unbundled services, and he does kind of high level assessments. And one of his specialties is parental alienation. So I would say, if you haven't connected with Brian yet, I can certainly put you in contact with him, or potentially you can find him.
Cool. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. So that's tomorrow at 7 British Columbia time, or it would be BC.
No, 7 Eastern, so it'd be 4 p.m. BC time.
Okay.
So that one I think will also be recorded. So you can potentially watch it after the fact if it's not. Are you in BC?
I am, and I could put my email in the chat to get the link.
Yeah, sure. If you don't do that, I'll send you the link.
Sure.
Okay. Well,
thank you.
That's pretty much it. Kristen, did you have any last comments?
No, that's good. Just thanks for having me here, Gavin, and good to see everybody. And everybody luck.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for that presentation. It was amazing. A couple of people have asked if the slides are going to be available, but this will be. I will publish this recording a little bit later on, either later this evening or tomorrow. For those of you who missed the first part of the presentation, it'll be published to the False Allegations Canada YouTube channel, and also to the Complex Trauma Canada YouTube channel, so you can review them there. Sarah, and I don't see your. Oh, there we go. I just see it there. So yeah, on behalf of everybody at False Allegations Canada, thank you, Kristen, for being here. It was a great presentation. Really appreciate you. Have a great rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, everyone. And if not before, I'll see you tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. Thanks.
Thanks, and
Thank
take
you
care.
so much, everybody. It was really good. Thank you.
Thanks for all the info.